right, thank you. Well, good morning again, church. And, as we continue to pursue our vision to share Jesus, when we've already prayed for it today, we recognize that so many people who live and work around us need Jesus, who is the hope of the world. And so, in several different ways, we just launched a next Share Jesus class. Week 2, the class met this last Wednesday night, and we're continuing to share and teach people how to share their faith and have natural spiritual conversations because we want to share Jesus with friends and neighbors, and we want to share Jesus with our entire community. And so, as a part of that, and as a part of that broader vision, we have brought on a brand new pastor to our staff team, Billy Beisman. Billy, why don't you come on up here? And so Billy will be serving in the role of campus pastor, and over the next several weeks and months, we will continue to give him increasing responsibilities, including quite a bit of preaching. And so today, continuing our series in Luke, Billy is going to bring the word, and so Billy, why don't you, first of all, let's officially welcome him to our church and our staff team. Thank you. And I encourage you, after the service, come find Billy. During the week, invite him out to dinner, invite him over to your house for lunch, whatever it may be. Get to know Billy, Sabra, Alex, and Logan. And today, we get to be blessed with teaching from the Word. So, Billy, share with us what God's laid on your heart.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Pastor Billy. It's great to be joining with you this morning and worshiping with you and sharing the Word. Thank you, Jason, for the kindness. And I just wanted to say a special thank you. You know, the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's a big transition to move and to, not just the stuff. Of course, that was a big deal. You guys were motivated. The people who came and moved me in, like I had a 26-footer trailer, the U-Haul thing, and I had my own trailer and everything. They got it done in an hour. That thing was bone empty in an hour. It was it was amazing. So, but all the other ways that you guys have just come alongside us and welcomed us, and we're just so blessed by that, and thank you for being so warm and welcoming in that. I do look forward to getting to know you and for getting your names at least 5-6 times, but eventually I will get your name, so appreciate you in that. Before we dig into the Word, you can go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 12. We'll be in Luke chapter 12, verse 35. So if you'd like to get ahead, you can just right there on the screen. But I wanted to ask you, how many of you have had something big stolen from you, or you've been robbed? Okay? Robbed of anything. That's a lot, okay? A lot of you. Yeah, I have had 2 big encounters in that, and I think of myself as a reasonably responsible person, but in my younger days, maybe a little less so. And I had a 1990 Honda Accord, which was extremely easy to break into. And when I was, again, just a bachelor working at my first church, they got stolen, it got taken away, and a couple days later, the cops called me up and they told me, hey, look, we found your car. It's a couple blocks over. So I just walked from my apartment to where they were at, where they told me to go. And so we're going through the car. I don't know if you've ever had your car stolen and then recovered, but the cops walked me through like, okay, is this yours? And they held up a bag they held up like tools, a bag of tools, and they went through, it's like, no, that's not mine, and they had a hat, like, yeah, the hat's mine, and was going through bit by bit so they could get whatever evidence they wanted and figure out what was what, and just the funny part of the story is the cop pulls up this big Ziploc baggie, a random assortment of pills, and he asks, is this yours? And I look at him for a few seconds and I go, no. And who would say yes? Like, who would? And he gets a smile come over his face because he realized, like, you'd be surprised who says just that. But that was my encounter with being stolen. I also had my apartment broken into. And, with the car, I ended up realizing that car was just is easily to steal. So eventually I got a newer car that had a little bit more theft protection in it. Upgraded my car. My apartment got stolen because my roommate was not very vigilant and didn't lock the house properly, and so we got robbed in that. And I upgraded my roommate too. I have a great roommate. Highly recommend. Make sure you have a good roommate on that. She's much, much better roommate. So anyways, we often make preparations and take actions to protect our stuff and our well-being and our loved ones. But we do. We operate day to day, and there's times where we let our guard down, or maybe that it's just a time we're not expecting it. Or maybe some of us just never really have our guard up in the first place. And so Jesus is sharing a passage with us that talks about that. And so we're going to be in Luke chapter 12, verse 35. And it says this: "Be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door to him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or towards daybreak. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him." All right, we look at that. Oh, I'm going to go to 46. Peter asked, "Lord, are you telling this parable to us or to everyone?" The Lord answered, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, 'My master is a long time in coming,' and he then begins to beat the other servants, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and in an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers." Look at that passage, and it's a serious passage, right? It goes from an interesting sort of analogy to Jesus talking about how high the stakes are for making error in this way. You know, with the timing being a crucial part of all this, and it being so uncertain, that thief in the night, like when my car got stolen or apartment got broken into, you don't expect it. If you expected it, you would have taken extra measures to protect yourself. So brass tacks, because it's such a crucial thing, and because the timing of accountability is unknown, what is God calling us to do? What is the brass tacks that God is calling us to do, that Jesus is trying to make a point? And that is vigilance. Jesus is calling people to vigilance. And part of vigilance, that first part, is preparedness. It's being prepared. It's being ready in your heart and your mind for what is to come. The imagery of those lamps burning, right, would have been a common metaphor for keeping faith, right, for keeping that going. Talk about the 10 virgins and their lamps, and the five that have it ready and the 5 that don't. It's about protecting your faith in your heart and having that healthy faith, embracing and remaining in the holiness that God is calling us to. We must be ready for the master return. And this is partially like a right mindset, okay? You see, the wise servant, he girds himself up. It says he dressed in a way ready for service. He was rolling up his sleeves in a way ready for the moment. The moment this master came, he was ready to do the work he was called to. But it's also beyond just a mindset. It's our frame of heart, right? It's having our heart in the right place, having our heart in a place where we are ready to want to do the will of the Father, to have our heart in a place where it's been cultivated and nurtured, where we've allowed it to be softened and molded the way that Jesus wants it to be, so that we are simply wanting to do what the Master calls us for. And we're going to come back, we're going to circle back to that. But a lot of things that people focus on this is the ways the Master returns. And one of the most common ways people read in this passage about the Master returning, in a lot of ways people will mostly interpret this, is that idea of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And our church definitely believes that Jesus will come again, and that there will be judgment and redemption, and all those things will be in place. And we should keep watch and be ready for any final workings of God that are in our world that we might experience. But I also got to say, in this first way, we talk about the Master returning, we got to be careful a little bit about sort of getting into what I would call divination of end times, like really get it into trying to figure out and the breakdown, the mechanics of when God's going to work. It'd be easy for people to try to read these passages and Daniel and other ones and get really far into the weeds on it. And when I was in college, we referenced a book called 88 Reasons the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. You get it, hopefully. If you didn't get it, you can read 89 Reasons the world will be raptured in 1989, all right? So we learned a lot about just how people can kind of break out, pardon the term, like Christian Ouija boards and like try to figure out exactly what God is going to do. And it's just not our place to figure out all those details. It's our place to be vigilant, to keep our heads up, keep our hearts open, our minds ready to be in that place. And yes, it may be tomorrow, it may be another 1,000 years. And I remember hearing, like, I wish I remembered where I got this from. I can't in my mind, but I remember someone talking about the end times, and they said something like, no matter whether you believe it's tomorrow or 1,000 years, it should make you a better Christian. If you think it's a long time in coming or a short time in coming, it should drive you to live out and to share the gospel with other people. And I love that because we're all inclined to kind of view it differently as we live life, as we look at the world around us, as we read Scripture. We'll have those inclinations. But if our view on that causes us to sit on the bench, become cynical, causes us to kind of wish the world would it's going to hell in a handbasket and good riddance, right? Or maybe we think it's a long time in coming and we think, you know what, we'll be able to solve our problems ourselves through altruism and token giving, right? Those are missed opportunities that Jesus wants to work more in. So if we look at that, we should have the gospel, we should share the gospel as if it's happening tomorrow, right? We should share and evangelize as if it's tomorrow. It's going to be that end. But we should be ready to steward and disciple and prepare ourselves as if it's going to be more of a marathon, a long time coming. But moving on, the second way that the Master returns is our own personal homecoming, right? We are the part of creation that understands that our time on earth in this way is limited. And with that has a whole bag. It comes with a whole baggage of issues and things about how we think about that. And there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of positive things that can actually come from us knowing about our own limitations on that. And remembering that reality can help us to keep our eye on the ball on what really matters. It helps us prioritize. If we're wise about that, it helps us really prioritize where Jesus is leading us, what really is important in life. And the third way is, and I think this is one that people miss the most, so let's put a little time on this one. I think people forget about the third way the Master returns in this passage is everyday moments. Those everyday, small, unexpected moments. They can be big or they can be small, right? And we experience those, and I remember one time I was trying to reach my early years. I had a car full of, it was open campus, so I could go pick up teenagers, and we had like four in the back of my Accord. Hadn't been stolen yet, I guess. Back in my Accord, and we're going through the intersection. We're trying to get to Fast Food Row and Coeur d'Alene, and these kids were a little rougher, and so I was trying to reach them, but I knew the clock was ticking because they got to get back to lunch hour. So we're getting there, we're doing a thing, and it's a busy intersection, and a car is broken down in front of us. And for me, my mind is still on the target. Still, I got to get these boys Taco Bell for whatever reason they chose Taco Bell. We got to get Taco Bell, we got to get whatever food poisoning we're going to get, and then we got to get back to campus, okay? We got to do this. So I'm just go. And those boys, those rougher fringe kids who, like, they were my discipline problems a lot of times, they were like, well, let's pull in and let's push the car out of the way. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's incredibly embarrassing, and it's a struggle, and there's a lot that comes with having your car just break down in the middle of an intersection, and people are honking at you and frustrated, and the boys in there were like, let's go help them out. Of course, that's the answer, right? We forget Taco Bell, of course, but beyond that, it was such an opportunity to do something good, and my mindset was simply not focused on something important, right? But it really wasn't where I need to be in that moment. I wasn't keeping my heart really open for those random small moments that Jesus was making, or at least showing me opportunities to be able to reach out and make a difference in this world and share the gospel. And those boys, we had a great talk about it. It was a good memory. We talked about it for years to come. But we look at that, and Jesus is in those moments. And we encounter those needs that Jesus calls us to. You know, some of you might remember the parable of the goats and sheep. For those who don't, it's okay. It's Jesus is talking to the people about two groups that are separated out. And one of them has done what Jesus desires, and one of them has not. And it goes into him holding account for that, missed, right? Embraced and missed opportunities about them doing the will. They're held to that consequence. But they ask that question, right? When did we see you hungry or thirsty or needing clothes? That's the question both groups asked. They didn't realize in those moments that those were the point of accountability daily. And Jesus responds with this: whatever you've done for the least of these, you have done for me. One group in that parable, the goats and sheep, was waiting for the moment where the king would be there to serve the king. And the other group was just serving, regardless. That's what Jesus is telling us to. The will of Jesus is that we serve others, feed them, take care of them, and bring healing and reconciliation on a daily, a minute-by-minute basis. Look at this passage. We go back to verse 41. It says this: Peter asked, Lord, are you telling the parable to us or to everyone? The Lord answered, who then is the faithful and wise manager whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whom the master finds doing so when he returns, not after. This third way the master returns, it really calls us to a daily stewardship of the resources that God has entrusted us with. That's that second part of vigilance. Right? Having your heart prepared, your mind prepared is the first part, but also the action, the doing what God is calling you to do in a daily way, to do the will of the master. Right? When we see the first and wise, faithful master, he's taking positive action. He's not just prepared, he's got the follow through. We could contrast that with the bad servant who's getting drunk, getting wasted, eating the food. It's this metaphor. He's not just eating his food, he's getting, and not just having the drink that's allotted to him. He's stealing, right? He's hoarding. He's in that where it's just about him. And we contrast that. This verse 45, it says, but suppose the servant says to himself, my master is taking a long time in coming, and then he begins to beat the other servants, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk. So why does he act that way? That's one thing. Look at it's a parable, of course. There probably is no actual servant. This is a story Jesus is telling us to make a point. But why does he act that way? And as I was reading that passage and going through and spending time in it, it kind of brought to mind those silly, like 1980s movies where the parents go on vacation, they trust the kid, the teenager, to stay at home and be able to do what they're called to do, right? To live in their house and like not mess it up. And as they're away, they obviously, what do? They have a party. They have one person over. Maybe they do it intentionally, or maybe it's just an out-of-control thing that happens, but they have this big party and things get broken. That one mom's favorite thing gets broken, or dad's car gets destroyed or whatever, and they're trying to figure out how to get away with it. The whole movie, hopefully you're not thinking of bad movies here, but whatever the movie is the whole culmination is, can they get away with it? All right? I also go to, I've heard this, there's a place in Idaho where it's this jurisdiction loophole, right? Where you get to a certain place where there's nobody, it's by Yellowstone, where no county, no municipality has jurisdiction over it. So they call it the death zone, because you could, in theory, kill somebody and that wouldn't be able to charge you with anything, and you're out of jurisdiction. And all these ways I think about when we feel like we're not held accountable, what do? Right? We feel like we can be in a place where we can get away with it. We're driven maybe to do those things, to act in that way that is not healthy, is not loving. Like you play hide in a sillier way. You play hide and seek with kids, and they're under a blanket, and you can see it's obvious. It's a kid hiding in a blanket, and you go, oh, well, there they are. What's their thought? Like a 4-year-old's thought is, if I can't see you, you can't see me. And how silly is that? How silly, right? I look at those stories, look at all those things came to my mind, and how silly we are with God. I'm reading Job, and it's talking about all the wonders of who God is. Where were you when the universe was created? And what do you know about the stars and the earth and the formation of it? Like, what is God's jurisdiction? What are God's limitations? How silly is it for us to think that if other people don't see it, then we've gotten away with it? We have such a finite, foolish way of viewing who God is and what he can do, and we're all guilty of it from time to time, but yeah, what is God's jurisdiction really? At what point have you escaped his presence? And more importantly, why would you want to get away with those things in the first place? It's more than just a foolish mindset we're talking about, or the mechanics of theology, of omniscience or omnipresent. It's really the heart being in the wrong place. The point isn't to avoid getting caught, which is like those 80s movies, right? The whole point is to get away with it. The point is that we want to, and we follow through with doing the right thing all the time. All the time. That's the motivation. And we look at being set in that way. Jesus is trying to cultivate our hearts in this passage to make that point about allow the Holy Spirit to work in who you are. There's a little side note I have here about just, we picture that image of the drunken party and the food and the beatings, and it'd be easy for us to sort of give ourselves a pass as responsible Christian adults or whatever, where, in a church setting, there are plenty of elegant and logical ways that Christians squander the blessings that God's given to them. So we look at this extreme example, right, and we hear those other examples. It's not really a pass to not be considerate and examine what we do, how we invest. Are we really being good stewards of what God's given us individually and collectively, to know where God's calling us, to always be, again, vigilant in being stewards of what God has trusted us with. Now, the end of this passage, we get to the latter part we haven't read yet. We're going to get there, but there's a crescendo to this section where it's culminating to the point that Jesus is trying to make, and he's doing it in several ways in talking with the people. In verses 54 through 56, it talks about interpreting the present time, the age. And I'm not going to read that. Hopefully you can, but a lot of people have talked about that being the end times. And again, I don't think that's primarily the point. It's Jesus saying, read the room. Read the room. You look at the weather and you can know whether you're supposed to put a coat on or not based on the clouds. Read the room about what is going on. And in this, he's telling them, God is doing a new thing. Read the room. We know that we were created to be in love and holiness, and we broke that, right? Adam and Eve. We ended up into lawlessness and sin. And then we had the law through Moses, made possible by faith in Abraham, and those sort of things kind of continue on. We have the law, the rules, what's right and wrong. And then Jesus comes, and we have this new age, this new way, this new time. Read the room. Verse 57 says this: "Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? As you are going with your adversary to the magistrate, the judge, try hard to be reconciled on the way, or your adversary may drag you off to the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison." That's his last point in this chapter, is the idea of the ministry of reconciliation. Being reconciled to God, being reconciled to others, being pulled into that healing path between all those relationships, to love God and to love others well. And as we talk about that, right, as we receive grace, from whom much is given, much is expected. If we're sitting here and we've been able to be encouraged by the love and blessings of what God has given us, we'll look at the masters, right, the two, the good one, the wise one, and the bad one. Look at they've been given a lot, right? They've been entrusted with a lot to oversee that household, to oversee those resources. What do they do with that? From whom much is given, much is expected. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to grace and when it comes to the ministry of reconciliation, I've been given much. And I think it's fair for me to say, like, I feel obligated. I feel compelled is probably a better word. I feel compelled to extend that grace, to pay that grace forward as best as I can. You know, we talked about the pop-ups, right? The Halloween pop-ups. I love that because I've had encountered with those on my own before, where we had busy stuff that was happening with the church, and that could be great. But I also had time where there were several years where I was able to have like a yard party, like a fire pit and hot cider and everything at my house. Just in my driveway, and we're at a dark street. We lived on a dark street where there was no real traffic for Halloween candy. There were not that many families on the street, but a couple blocks over, there was a really active trick-or-treating area. So we didn't get hardly any traffic down our street. But we passed out, and we kind of worked together and passed out little notes and invites saying, hey, just come. Just come up and down the street. It doesn't matter if you have kids or not. We'll have the fire pit going. We'll have a bunch of chairs. And it was a great opportunity to just have quality conversations with people. And in those moments, there were, I had neighbors who were older and couldn't have kids, and they wanted them, and they just couldn't. And so, I had my two boys, and they just loved being around them, and being with our family was just healing for them. To be able to get out of the house and to break away from maybe some habits that weren't healthy and just be there. That was healing for them, and it was something we just made available and talk with them. And the neighbor that was struggling with his job, and he didn't really like his job. He was shut in, and I didn't solve his problem, but it was just there. We listened to each other, and we talked, and we spent about an hour just chatting about what life was going on, and those were valuable times. That God just was able to work through us, to be in that place, to be agents of reconciliation. A lot of times we think about that role of healing relationships as big, dramatic conflict situations, and that's true. We're called to a high degree of responsibility and love in those situations, but it's also, don't miss those little moments where you can just make yourself available to have those quality encounters with whoever Jesus brings to you. I'm going to call the worship team up, and we're going to prepare to continue in worship through song. But, as our church explores those themes of stewardship, of serving in ministry, of sharing the good news, we got these classes and groups that are out there for you. Jason shared and Javier shared that there's a lot of set ways we have prepared for you to be able to engage in your heart and your mind, to be able to receive and live out what God is calling you to, what God is calling us to. Prepare your hearts and minds to act. So to be aware that, yes, that clock is ticking. That's a big part of this passage. One way or the other, the clock is ticking. And we need to focus on what really matters in life. We need to be about the Father's business. And so I'm going to call up the prayer team as well. And as they're coming forward, there's a few things that we could be on our hearts and our minds as we consider this passage, we consider what Jesus is telling us. And for some of us, it might be getting our mind in the right mindset. It might mean that whatever ways we make choices with our calendar or our checkbook or our energy or resources or talents, that we allow for God to kind of break into our minds, our way of doing things, young or old, to set good stewardship of those resources. Maybe for others, it's a heart reset. Maybe you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing, and you're going through those motions, and you're showing up, and you're checking boxes, but maybe your heart's struggling to be in the right place. The Holy Spirit will work on that. So I encourage you, if either one of those are things that you're maybe needing to engage with, find somebody to talk to. You can come forward and pray with these people, talk with them about it. Find anybody that you trust that you can engage with on that and pray with God. Open your hearts and minds to what God's going to do in that. The second thing is read the room. Jesus is doing great things, right? Jesus is doing great things. Jesus is actively healing the world. Read that room. This is what he's doing. We're called to be a part of that. We cannot solve the world's problems. We can't fix even this community. We can't fix everything about it. But we can simply come alongside what Jesus is doing. Be good stewards of what he's calling us to. So how is God calling you to act? How is God calling you to bring healing to the people that are around you, to guide them? What step, what action do you need to take to be where God wants you to be? Let's continue in worship this morning.